por el monte y verás todo lo bueno que el monte te da.
In my little village of 700 people, there were 9 young people going to medical school in a tiny village in the foothills of the Andes.
Ellos inventan la cura, inventan la enfermedad, inventaron la farmacia, la medicina cara a cara.
I had already known about Barrio Adentro, which is a very impressive direct primary medical program supplied by thousands of Cuban doctors that had started in 2004. And so for the first time ever, 70% of the Venezuelan population was getting very competent medical care. And 10 to 14,000 Cuban doctors were committing themselves to come in 2-year stints to work in little barrio clinics and provide health care. But what I learned from my fellow campesinos, my neighbors in our village, is that they were going to be the replacements for the Cubans, that they were being trained not as barefoot doctors in a few-month program, but in a very intensive 6-year medical program. And not only were these 9 being trained, but 25,000 people around all of Venezuela. Well, the book starts out with just opening to say, these amazing things are happening. Thousands of doctors going to treat the poor in Venezuela and thousands of people being trained on a scale that no one could imagine. But then, because it's being built on Cuban expertise, the book talks a little bit about Cuban medical internationalism and how successful Cuba has been going to many countries around the world, but particularly in Latin America and the Caribbean and some countries of Africa. Then it talks a little bit about the background of the Cuban medical system and how they developed a revolutionary idea of medicine and the idea of being a physician as a revolutionary vocation. And then the center of the book is built around 2 chapters devoted to Barrio Adentro and how it was organized, how it came into being in about a year. It went from 300 doctors to over 10,000 doctors. And I believe Cuba is the only country in the world that has anything like that capability to be able to provide that kind of service. But then in the last few chapters, I felt it necessary to talk about a few other things. One, that this is happening in Venezuela, which may seem rich because it's an oil-producing country, but on the world scale, it's a medium-income country. Average incomes may be in that range of $10,000 to $14,000 a year, about a third or a quarter of the U.S. or Europe. So it's providing this at a huge scale with resources that really aren't that huge. And at the same time, they have a medical establishment that's a capitalist medical establishment that's already there, that is still educating people in ordinary kind of elite universities. And it hates the idea of a new medical system being created. And so I wanted to talk a little about that tension that in a very open and democratic country, which Venezuela is, despite what you might read in the US press, these tensions, get pretty high sometimes. And then beyond that, I wanted to treat in a chapter the incredible animosity directed at both Venezuela and Cuba through the US State Department, the Pentagon, etc., trying to figure out ways to sabotage their cooperation, which has been completely peaceful cooperation and on one of the best things one could imagine to build this kind of medical system. Because they're not only building it in Venezuela, they're now helping to start build the same kind of system in Bolivia and any other countries that would like to participate. Plus, Cuba has an incredible school called the Latin American School of Medicine outside of Havana, which trains 10,000 new doctors to go back to their home countries in Latin America and other parts of the world. So I felt it necessary to point out that this experiment is up against that kind of opposition too, and that we in the U.S. don't hear about that. We don't hear about how our country is doing this really negative thing. And it's also nearly impossible in the mainstream press to hear anything about this wonderful experiment in medicine and cooperation. So I thought that was necessary to put at the end. The first graduates have just graduated this past year. Those who started in 2005, 2006 are graduating in 2011, and now they will be moving into residencies alongside the Cubans in Barrio Adentro. But of course, part of the magic of this training program is at the same time these students were taking intensive academic courses and every medical idea class that you would take in any program around the world, they would spend a half a day, 6 days a week, working alongside Cuban doctors and Cuban nurses and technicians in the various Barrio Adentro settings. So they had a marvelous hands-on preparation that I don't think exists anywhere else in the world. Even in Cuba, where they're trying to emulate that, they say that we're sort of following the example of the Venezuelans because it's working so well there. The final chapter deals just a little bit with the idea that this is not just an experiment in medicine and producing revolutionary doctors, but to my mind, it's an ideal experiment in showing how you create an active revolutionary alternative and how people from the ground up acquire the skills and the motivation, the tutoring from mentors who know what they're doing, to be able to carry out building a new kind of society.
Camino verde hay que caminar. Anda, camina por